Magic Missile! Welcome everyone to Actions in Combat. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Cast a Spell action. Now, casting is not necessarily an action in of itself, or it does not have to be an action, should I say. The casting time is specified, but it could be anything from a bonus action, a reaction, 1 minute, etc. If it's much longer than 1 minute, such as teleportation for quick escape, you need to spend 10 consecutive turns to add up to 1 minute, because each turn is 6 seconds, to cast the spell. The interesting thing is that you're taking the spell action each time that you are casting during this 1 minute period. But it's just your actions being taken up doing this, which means you can use your bonus action to do whatever you want. For example, say you're setting up a teleportation circle during those 10 rounds. Once it's set up, the players can escape out of there. While you can't, cast another leveled spell, obviously, but you can, command spiritual weapon to attack. You can even, disengage. I mean, you'd have to say the same place for some spells, but you can even maybe, if you're, part rogue, you can disengage. There's a lot of interesting applications to casting 1 minute spells in combat that I don't often think to do, and probably a lot of players feel the same way. Now, casting a spell for multiple consecutive turns does mean you have to continue doing it, or the spell will break, and you have to maintain concentration during this time, or the spell will also end. This means you can't planar binding while you're trying to you have a summon you summon a creature and try to planar bind them, because all summoning spells pretty much are all concentration, so it would break and they could disappear or row free before you had the chance to bind them, unless you did something like Wish, which basically makes all spells, no matter how long they normally take, an action, which also allows you to save a lot of money with spells like planar binding. Also remember, you can only cast 1 level spell a turn, but the specifics of the wording are actually really interesting. Basically it says that if you cast a spell as a bonus action, no matter what spell it is, you can only cast cantrips for the rest of your turn. This means that if you basically have to cast your leveled spell as a bonus action, if you want to cast spells as bonus action, one of your spells is a leveled spell, because if you cast Shillelagh or anything, your spell that turn as an action has to be a cantrip. Basically, if you can't, normally you can cast you can action surge spells, right? You can cast level spell and then action surge, cast level spell again. That's okay. But if you cast a spell as a bonus action, you have to use cantrips for both your action surge and your normal surge, because it's all during that turn. Same thing with reaction spells. Say you cast a spell and it gets counterspelled. If you cast a spell as your bonus action, you can only cast cantrips on your turn, which means you can't counterspell that counterspell. So you have to be really careful about that. So that's why if you're a sorcerer, you want to, again, quicken your leveled spell, and then so that you can still use you can still cast for a spell that is not a bonus action. You can, unfortunately, basically, if you're going to quicken a spell, your meta magic is not going to be able to be put on your leveled spell, except quicken. Now, if your spell has verbal, somatic, or material components, they can be perceived unless through subtle spell, and imperceptible casting causes the effect to be imperceptible, which means it's impossible to identify how to counterspell it. Now, just like attacking, casting a spell isn't always restricted to the cast a spell action. For example, casting a cantrip as part of the Blade Singer's extra attack, or casting a spell whose casting time isn't an action, or long, like a bonus action. Also, you cannot, or as an item, the rules are a bit vague for items, but also you can't cast an armor if you're not proficient in it. There is nothing about forcibly donning armor, but this may be a way to hamper enemy spellcasters. Spells with the range of self are probably the most limiting spells, because they technically don't have a target. You can't twin them, glyph of warding them. The only way to give someone else the benefits of a self spell is if they themselves cast it through something like the Ring of Spell Storing. there is a bit of rules as written versus rules as intended dilemma with spellcasting focuses. Something, for example, like the artificers, the artillerist and alchemists, they have special focuses, like the arcane firearm, that or even like the bard, they have the spiritual focus for the spirit part. Like it basically gives a bonus to your healing, right? But there are barely any spells that use material component, so technically you're not using your focus unless you have a material component. But like that doesn't make any sense rules as written, because there's literally like just one spell, maybe even less, that bards can get, like unless you have magical secrets, so that have material components that are healing. So essentially, for it to even be used, you'd have to ignore that, which I think Wizards just says, using the focus is just casting a spell normally. So that's at least how I would rule it. Just some basic rule stuff. Most of you probably know most of these if you play D&D for at least a little bit, but you can only concentrate on one spell at a time. If you cast on another concentration spell, the first one ends. You can, whenever you take damage, you must make a DC 10 concentration or higher. If the half the damage is higher, then you have to make the save is half the damage. If you're like 34, then you have to make a DC 17 concentration save, which is basically just a constitution save. Area effects can have different shapes. Effects of the same spell don't stack. You must have a clear path to the target of the spell. Once the spell is cast, its effect isn't limited to the spell's range unless specified. A spellcaster must have one hand free for focus or material components and another hand free for somatic, which is one of the reasons why Warcaster is so good, which means you can have hands free. I think there's one thing that allows your shield to even be focused too, which makes it better if you're a caster who can use stuff like that. So again, removing all these restrictions is great. Subtle spell, that's another like a little unused advantage there, because you get to ignore somatic components, so you always have a hand free. But spells, of course, can be upcast, and they often have enhanced effects when you use so. Cantrips don't use spell slots, so they can be used unlimitedly. And that's about it. So there we go. Spellcasting is about the most complex action, but it's because it's a very important one. I hope this video helped both new players and experienced players alike with spellcasting. This is Dodeca Dungeon, signing off.